Page 34. Question 31. Sketch the character of Julia. Contrast Julia with Lydia. Answer. Julia is Lydia's friend and is a foil to her. She does not have the romantic absurdities of Lydia. She is of a realistic temperament. She is sober and prudent. Julia is the counterpart of Absolute in the subplot, which centers round the love between Julia and Falkland. In the subplot, Julia is realistic and sober, while Falkland is capricious and sentimental. In the main plot, Absolute is cool-headed and prudent, while Lydia is romantic and frivolous. She is, however, subjected to the tortures of her sentimental lover. He is suspicious and jealous by nature. He cannot endure that Julia is in good health and enjoy her stay in Bath in his absence. He suspects her honesty and torments her with hard words. Julia accepts all this tyranny of her capricious lover and says that all these absurdities come from his sincere love. At the end, however, she reaches the end of her forbearance when Falkland invents a story of his crime and his intended flight from the place. She now rises to a heroic stature. She can no longer brook the insult that has been meted out to her by Falkland. She feels strongly that he has trifled with her sincerity. She declares that she cannot marry him, but she at the same time says that as her faith has once been given to him, she can never exchange with another. Her sincerity and constancy are beyond doubt, and it is a pity that such a woman has been a prey to the tortures and tyranny of a worthless lover. Julia offers an interesting contrast to Lydia. Lydia is fantastic, giddy-headed, dreaming of romantic elopement, rope ladder, a coach and four drive to Scotland. Her imagination feeds on absurdities collected from romances and sentimental novels. She is, in the words of Absolute, romantic, devilish romantic. Nothing shocks her so much as the prospect of being called a spinster and married by a fat church priest in an ordinary manner. Julia, on the other hand, is a sober, serious girl who can fix her affections on the person she loves, to whom she is bound by gratitude and by the instructions of her father. Her constancy, her devotion to Falkland, her common sense, all these offer contrast to Lydia's frivolous and whimsical temper. Lydia has the good sense that she recognizes the superior wisdom of her cousin. Julia entreats Lydia not to allow a man who loves her sincerely to suffer from her caprice. Julia is sometimes annoyed by the caprices of Falkland and bursts into tears. But in spite of emotional effusions, Julia never rejects Falkland. She, however, becomes heroic at the end when she can no longer endure the insult inflicted on her by Falkland. She feels that he has trifled with her sincerity, that her honesty is being constantly questioned and tested. Her womanly dignity is thus impaired. She, however, relents and offers to marry Falkland. Julia is more humanized than Lydia, whose passion for romantic elopement has a greater weight than her attachment to her lover. Question 32. Sketch the character of Sir Anthony Absolute. Answer. Sir Anthony Absolute, as his name suggests, is absolute in his authority and control over his son. He is presented as a type of parental tyranny. He enforces complete obedience of his command. He hates the manners of the young persons. He looks with annoyance at the maid coming forth from a circulatory library. He prescribes strong measures for curbing the evil tendencies in the young ones of the age. He is not prepared to listen to the arguments of the young fellows. He tells Mrs. Malaprop, quote, "If he demurred, I knocked him down, and if he grumbled at that, I always sent him out of the room." Unquote. He recommends that Lydia be put under lock and key if she refuses to marry a man of her aunt's choice. Page 35. He is terribly angry when his son opposes his wish. He says to his son, quote, "You know, I am compliance itself when I am not thwarted. No one more easily led when I have my own way. But don't put me in a frenzy." Unquote. He calls his son Captain Absolute, quote, "a hypocritical young dog," unquote. He is a man of, quote, "worst temper," unquote, and great passions. Fagg says, quote, "Sir Anthony trims my master. He is afraid to reply to his father, then vents his spleen on poor Fagg," unquote. There is, however, a romantic side of his character. In his young age, he married for love and was a bold intriguer within quotes. When his son accepts Lydia of his choice and plays the obedient son, Sir Anthony is annoyed that Jack displays so little interest in women. His humour shines out even through his wrathful mood. Quote, "No, I'll die sooner than forgive him. Die, did I say? I'll live this 50 years to plague him." Unquote. He waxes poetic when he describes the charm of Lydia to his son. His romantic nature is combined with aesthetic taste. He tells his son, quote, "When I ran away with your mother, I would not have touched anything old or ugly to gain an empire." Unquote. At the end of the play, he is romantic and relenting. Unquote. Quote, "I like your spirit, and at night we single lads will drink a health to the young couples, and a husband to Mrs. Malaprop." Unquote. He further says, quote, "Come, Mrs. Malaprop, will not disturb their tenderness. Theirs is the time of life for happiness." Unquote. He is full of understanding and reason when his wishes are obeyed. He confesses that he has inherited the traits of the family. Quote, "The blood of the Absolutes was always impatient. It runs in the blood of our family." Unquote. Sheridan has drawn the various aspects of Sir Anthony's character. Although he is a type of determined and strong parents who would not allow their sons to go their own ways, he is yet an individual because of his varied traits, his humour, his romantic temperament, his understanding and reason. He is, however, a humorous character because of his contradictions. He will not allow his son to have his own way in the matter of marriage, but he boasts that he ran away with the woman he married. He wants his son's obedience to his wish, but when the son plays the obedient son, he is angry because his son displays little interest in women. He recommends that Lydia be put under lock and key, but admits at the end that youth is the time for joys. He knows that his son has passion in his heart, but he takes pleasure in thwarting it. He is a lovable personality when his wishes are complied with, but he cannot brook disobedience on the part of the young ones. Question 33. Sketch the characters of Bob Acres and Sir Lucius O'Trigger and show how they are contrasted. Answer. Bob Acres is the conventional fool of the comic drama made popular by Shakespeare through his immortal creation of Sir Andrew Agnetchik. The foolish country squire causes roaring laughter by the display of his folly on various occasions. He has been described as, quote, "an eccentric planet," unquote. He has been gulled to believe that he is a fit match for the city-born sophisticated Lydia, and he tries to be a man of fashion. A country square, unused to the ways and graces of the sophisticated society, he foolishly imagines that the least way to succeed as a lover to Lydia is to learn how to dance and dress in the latest fashion. He thinks that Lydia has rejected his suit because of his ungainly dress. He develops a dress mania. He says to David, quote, "Dress does make a difference, David," unquote. Page 36. He has also taken to swearing. He invites the attention of Captain Absolute to the new kind of swearing which he calls, quote, oaths referential, unquote, or, quote, sentimental swearing, unquote. His legs cannot reproduce a French dance, and his oath is, quote, odds, jig and tabers, unquote. He is a fool because he remains ignorant about the true identity of Ensign Beverley, who is no other than Captain Absolute, his friend. He is a coward, but is persuaded to throw a challenge to Ensign Beverley by Sir Lucius O'Trigger. He sends the challenge through Captain Absolute. At the duel scene, in his courage vanishes, and he promptly withdraws when he comes to know that Ensign Beverley is no other than Captain Absolute. His name, Bob Acres, suggests his two qualities, his stupidity and his countryside manners. Sir Lucius is a bold Irishman who carries on an intrigue. To marry Delia. The maid Lucy keeps him in the dark about the identity of the lady with whom he is carrying on clandestine correspondence. He labors under the impression that Delia is a young girl, so his discomfiture is a foregone conclusion. He has an evil design to mend his lost fortune by marrying a rich lady. He instigates Bob Acres to challenge Ensign Beverley to a duel, and he himself challenges him to a duel for his supposed belief that he has interfered in his suit to Delia. Sir Lucius is a man of fighting spirit. His name Trigger suggests that he has always kept his pistol ready for triggering. His blood itches for fight. When Bob Acres withdraws from the duel, he insists on fighting. He withdraws on knowing that Delia is Mrs. Malaprop and not young Lydia. He indecently rejects the suit of Mrs. Malaprop and wants to hand over her to any suitor. He is very cruel to the lady. He is a gull. He has been gulled by the maid Lucy, and that is the source of humour in his character. He is no coward like Bob Acres, and blue blood flows in his veins, though he does not have the wealth. Bob Acres and Sir Lucius O'Trigger offer glaring contrast to each other and to Captain Absolute. Acres is a cowardly country gentleman who thinks it worth his while to cultivate town manners and to seek the hand of a fashionable young lady of the elegant society. Absolute enjoys the fun by provoking him into gallantry. He relishes his foolish effusions, quote, "You know I am not my own property. Nay, dear Lydia was forestalled me," quote, unquote. Sir Lucius O'Trigger is a nice contrast to both Acres and Absolute. He has not the wit to see how foolish and cowardly a country gentleman Acres is. He is an Irish adventurer who wants to mend his fortune by a lucky marriage. The manner in which he provokes a quarrel with Absolute is an excuse to challenge him to a duel, and the manner to which Absolute meets his wayward disposition point to the contrast between the two characters. Both Bob Acres and Sir Lucius are type characters. Bob Acres is a type of country booby, and Sir Lucius is the type of an aristocrat fallen on evil days. Both are gulls. Bob is a coward, but Sir Lucius is a bold adventurer. Bob is purely a funny character, but the Irish adventurer creates fun by his being gulled by the maid Lucy. But he also inspires loath because of his evil nature. Question 34. We read, "The Rivals nowadays, but not for its social purpose, but for its wit and humour." Question 34. We read The Rivals nowadays not for its social purpose, but for its wit and humour. Answer. Sheridan gives a broad picture of fashionable society of the 18th century London in his play The Rivals. See answer to question 7, last paragraph. Page 37. Add, but its main attraction is satire veiled in wit and fun. It does not have the sparkling verbal exchanges which characterize the Restoration comedy of manners. In Congreve's The Way of the World, these are wit combats between Millamant and Mirabell in the famous bargain scene. That wit is absent in Sheridan's play, but it is marked by wit and humour in the presentation of characters and situations. See answers to question 15 and to 5, paragraphs 3 and 4. Explanations. Act 1. 1. Fagg says, why then, the cause of all this is love, love. Thomas, who, in brackets, as you may get read to you, brackets closed, has been a masquerader ever since the days of Jupiter. This is from scene 1. This is said by Fagg, the servant of Captain Absolute, to Thomas, the coachman of Sir Anthony Absolute, in the first scene of the play. From their conversation we learn that Lydia Languish, a young lady, lives under the tutelage of her, quote, old tough aunt, unquote. The aunt desires her to marry a rich young heir, Captain Absolute, son of Sir Anthony Absolute. Lydia, however, has her young head turned by the sentimental novels that she pores over without her aunt's knowledge. She has thus built in her fancy a romance of love, and under that amorous sentimentalism she has preferred, quote, love in a cottage, unquote. Knowing this, Captain Absolute has come from London to Bath, and under the disguised name of Ensign Beverley, a half-pay subaltern, he has arranged to pay his address to Lady Languish. Fagg says that lovers since Jupiter have assumed various forms to approach their beloved. The reference to the various stories about Jupiter's amours is made. Jupiter was the king of Greek gods. He is also known as Zeus. He disguised himself in various shapes in his pursuit of earthly maidens. He changed himself into a shower of gold to marry Danae, D-A-N-A-E, into Satyr, S-A-T-Y-R, to court Antiope, A-N-T-I-O-P-E, a swan to marry Leda, a bull to marry Europa, E-U-R-O-P-A. Like Jupiter, Captain Absolute has disguised himself as Ensign Beverley for courting Lydia. Fagg, a servant, uses classical allusion to express his mind. He imitates the manners and fashions of aristocratic society. 2. When the fashion had got foot on the bar, I guessed 'twould mount to the box. Scene 1. Fagg and Thomas converse. Fagg speaks of the fashions. Wig wearing has gone out of fashion. He advises Thomas to give up wig wearing. Thomas regrets the discontinuation of wigs. It is a pity that doctors and lawyers have discarded the use of wigs and have begun to put on their own hair. He says that when the barristers or lawyers have begun to discard the fashion of wearing wigs, in the next step, the coachman would also follow suit. Bar means barristers and box here means coachman. Thomas places the barristers only a little above the coachman. Snobbery in the 18th century England was so pervasive that it percolated even to the lower ranks of the society. Here Sheridan speaks of a prevalent fashion in the 18th century aristocratic society. Page 38. In the heyday of fashion, such was the extravagance in his article of dress that as much as 3 guineas were paid in England for fine qualities of hair and wigs made at the cost of £10. 3. This temper, I must own, has cost me many happy hours, but I have learned to think myself his debtor for those imperfections which arise from the ardour of his attachment. Scene 2. It is part of the Julia-Lydia conversation in the second scene of the first act. Julia explains to Lydia Falkland's capricious nature. She says that Falkland is too noble to be jealous, fretful without rudeness. According to her, his capriciousness comes from his ardent passion. He expects that every thought and emotion of his mistress would move in unison with his. He always suspects that he is not loved enough. Julia confesses that this capricious temper has caused her many unhappy hours, but she is bound to him by gratitude, and she feels that all his excesses come from his deep attachment to her. Julia's estimate of Falkland as a lover is based on her real affection for him. The two were engaged before her father's death. Her father knew Falkland and approved of their engagement. Moreover, Falkland preserved her life, so she has gratitude for him. She is tortured by his suspicions, but she thinks that they come from his deep affection. At last we will see that she will come to the end of tether and would refuse to marry him because the insults and tortures inflicted on her by his constant suspicions of her honesty have taxed her power of endurance. 4. Madam, a circulating library in a town is as an evergreen tree of diabolical knowledge. It blossoms through the year, and depend on it, Mrs. Malaprop, that they who are so fond of handling the leaves will long for the fruit at last. Scene 2. This is a part of the conversation between Mrs. Malaprop and Sir Anthony Absolute in the second scene after Lydia has left them. Sir Anthony has seen the maid Lucy bring books from a circulating library. She says to Mrs. Malaprop that a circulating library is a breeding ground of all sorts of vices. It is like an evergreen tree that bears flowers throughout the year. It may be compared to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as mentioned in the Bible. The sight of the tree tempted Adam and Eve, who enjoyed the fruits thereof and thus incurred the displeasure of God. They were banished from the Garden of Eden in consequence of disobedience. A circulating library is like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The romances that are circulated by such a library deal with vulgar thrills. They describe illicit love, marital infidelity, love intrigues, elopements, etc. The treatment of such themes is attractive to young minds. When they turn over the pages of such books, they are tempted to realize those thrills in their own lives. In other words, the study of these romantic tales makes for the moral degradation of the reader. Sir Anthony's remarks are hardly too strong, considering the books we have seen Miss Lydia choosing. Speaking of the novels of the time, Macaulay says, quote, "The very name of novel was held in horror among religious people. In decent families which did not possess extraordinary sanctity, there was a strong feeling against all such works." Unquote.